Pedro Neves Marques is a New York-based artist born in Lisbon. Currently, he is presenting work at Gasworks London. In his exhibition called It Bites Back, he features film, poetry, sound installation, and digital animation. I will be focusing on the film installation A Mordida, The Bite, which consists of two films, Sex as Care and The Gender of the Lab. I'm predominantly interested in the queer polyamorous throuple presented in Sex as Care, but will reference the gender of the lab as Marcus has made a clear link between the two. I aim to establish whether Marcus A gives a good representation of the struggles of queer Brazilian people under the current political climate, B is actually trying to represent the LGBT community and has a clear message he's trying to portray, and C is taking away from the voices of lesser known queer Brazilian artists and people. In the exhibition leaflet, it states that Marcus is trying to parallel the Zika virus epidemic, which has been declared an enemy of the nation, to the resurgence of reactionary politics that led to the election of Jair Bolsonaro. Specifically with Sex as Care, Marcus seems to be addressing the fear within the LGBT community in Brazil, who are now facing a president that is openly homophobic and actively trying to undo the progress they have made. Under Bolsonaro, the section of the ministry that is devoted to diversity and human rights has been shut down. The Ministry of Women, Family and Human Rights declined to add the LGBT community as a group explicitly protected by its mandate, and the health official who headed the nation's HIV prevention task force was fired, apparently for authorizing a campaign aimed at educating transgender Brazilians. These are just some of the political attacks Bolsonaro has encouraged. Marcus presents us with a narrative that seems personal, but is clearly meant to be a comment on the wider political issues in Brazil. It is a metaphor for the LGBT community, being the mosquitoes Brazil has declared war against. After watching the Sex as Care film and discussing the film with Joey Conceição, the front of house coordinator of Gasworks, I came to the following conclusions. At first, Sex as Care seems to be about intimate moments in the relationship between three people who all seem paranoid and restless about the military presence in Sao Paulo. They're in some other place, a house surrounded by forest, as they exist there just waiting for something, unknown to the audience what that might be. One of them always keeps watch, looking through the window or balcony in a saddened daze. However, not much else is clear. The audience is not exactly sure how these people ended up together or why. And there is this forced tension between the bodies. It almost feels like the people don't really know each other or actually connect to each other, which could be a critique of Marquez deciding to use actors instead of real people who are experiencing this. On the other hand, paired with the ambient sound in the space and the somber reality of what this film is addressing, perhaps this strange relationship makes sense. The first slide of poetry by Marcus to intersect this film reads, "Sex as care in times of crisis, among friends, among enemies," alluding to a sort of need for physical comfort regardless of real connection, perhaps with even so-called enemies. Even though the bodies in the film are not really sexually involved, there is a sense of intimacy that feels like it is required of them. The slightly dystopian setting that Marcus creates, where these three people appear to be cut out from the world, creates a doomsday effect, where it could make sense that these people are together because it's all they have. This is their only safe space. This would make sense because in Marcus's other work he explores the idea of the apocalyptic, and it could be said that suppressed people around the world are already experiencing the apocalypse. Nevertheless, I do believe it is problematic that Marcus is representing such important themes and issues without having experienced them himself. And additionally, instead of giving the platform over to real Brazilian queer people, he chooses to use actors, though this is regular for his practice. The film features a relationship and gender identity that some of the audience may be experiencing for the first time, and therefore it is important to note the responsibility that comes with representing those communities. The film attempts to illustrate these complex transgender, polyamory and ethnic minority narratives that are all intertwined in this one relationship, but seems to only touch the surface. Marcus does not really address any issue in depth. The backgrounds and narratives of these characters he has created seem distant and in pieces. Also, in the poetry we see throughout the film, we see phrases such as toxic masculinity, a gap between genders, class division, the suppression of language, etc. But none of these ideas are really unpacked in the film. It is down to the audience to add their own knowledge of these ideas into the experience. Perhaps Marquez's intentions weren't to represent the LGBT community, but there is no denying that he's trying to address the struggles queer people in Brazil are facing in the current political climate. The exhibition leaflet reads, "It Bites Back examines the increasingly palpable threat against queer lives in Brazil and elsewhere, but I believe this is less so an examination as it is a glimpse at the fact that these issues exist." However, this is not to say that Marquez is ignorant of his position in talking about minority groups. In his Eflux essay, Parallel Futures, One or Many Dystopias, he explains in great depth about how colonial capitalism has suppressed both the past, present, and future by both preemptively and predictively streamlining a single dominant modernity that narrows down and simplifies the world in which we live in. He acknowledges his position within the essay and addresses it. In an interview with Freeze magazine, Marques addresses these issues in A Mordida, acknowledging that it's impossible to escape the contradictions inherent to the historical Portuguese-Brazilian relationship, and that he's not trying to pretend to represent anyone or heal anything. The interviewer notes that in A Mordida, the tone appears less controlled and more open to misinterpretation than his previous work, which Marques replies with, "I'm not interested in realism or straightforward documentary. I want to create works when you only realize midway through that what you're watching or reading is touched by science fiction or otherworldly realities." Therefore, I will not criticize him for being ignorant, but rather I can conclude that Marques presents the audience with a semi-fictional narrative that is not trying to represent reality as we commonly understand it, but instead it gives us a glimpse into a world we don't quite understand, but which allows us to reflect on our own. All things considered, I believe that Marques was neither trying to represent the LGBT community nor has any message to give about the current political climate in Brazil for queer people, but instead is researching the reality of these people to create a semi-fictional narrative that will allow for the audience to then do their own research and form their own opinion on these issues. However, this does not mean that the audience won't misinterpret the films and understand it as a documentary piece, but it seems that Marques is willing to take that risk. He's not taking away from the voices of Brazilian queer artists, but neither is he using his platform to project their message. Therefore, it is difficult to judge if this work presents issues about the indignity of speaking for others from a place of power, as it seems that Marques is still trying to figure out, using all of his practice, from writing to making art, how exactly his background influences his understanding of these topics. And although it may be frustrating that he does not really risk trying to convey any particular message, it feels appropriate for his practice. I will leave you with this quote by Gabriella Beckhurst when reviewing this exhibition. "It Bites Back doesn't attempt to overcome binary thinking, but rather allows itself to be vulnerable to the tensions that arise from Marques's status as a white male artist born in Portugal who has chosen to work in a Brazilian context with feminist, queer, post-colonial and indigenous politics."